Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're having a good weekend. It's that time of year when the latest Ledger Holidays Battlefield Tours brochure is out, and these are about to hit the doorsteps of our regular clients who travel with us on a regular basis. And if you're registered on our website, you'll get one too, either at ledger.co.uk or ledgerbattlefields.co.uk. But I thought we'd have a quick run through just to see what we're up to this year. And our fantastic design team has obviously started with an excellent cover to get people's interest in, and then we work our way through talking about what we're up to this year. Obviously for 2018 we'll be focusing very much on the end of the First World War centenary, looking at a lot of 1918 related stuff, as we'll see, but also sort of retrospective stuff for the whole centenary. Packed as usual full of photographs, details of our team of battlefield guides, with one or two new faces for 2018. And then we start with our First World War tours, a couple of our favourites. Flanders Fields, looking at the battlefields of Ypres, and the Old Contemptibles, looking at the battles of 1914, from Mons to Le Cateau to the First Battle of Ypres. And then All Quiet on the Western Front, that's one of our mainstay tours, and we follow three key battlefields of the First World War: Ypres, Arras and the Somme. For 2018 we're very pleased to be incorporating the Lens 1418 Museum in our programme, an excellent new museum. We had a huge amount of interest in Passchendaele last year, so we're continuing with our Passchendaele tour, looking at the forerunner to it, obviously with Messines, and then through the Third Battle of Ypres. But starting with the first of our new 2018 tours looking at the 1918 battlefields, we've got Somme to the Armistice, which is a 5-day tour looking at the breakout on the Somme, the 8th of August 1918, through to the battles around Arras and Cambrai in September and October of 1918, leading up to the final fighting along the Sombray Canal. At Oars we go to Wilfred Owen's grave, for example, but obviously we look at a bigger picture than just him along the Sombray Canal, and we end in Mons, where for the British and Commonwealth forces the war came to a conclusion. So a good one to tie in with events of next year. Then we've got 3 separate armistice tours for next year. Our traditional tour to Ypres for 11th November, but we had a lot of requests for some other ones. So we're going to the Somme for Armistice Day next year. Many people wanted to remember the end of the World War I centenary on the Somme, and also many wanted to actually go to Mons, to be at Mons on the 11th of November 2018, because many of those had travelled with us and were there right at the beginning in 2014. To tie in with those on a wider scale, we've also got our First and Last Shots, which stays in Mons and looks at the beginning and the end of the war from 1914 to 1918 in and around Mons itself. And next spring, the first major anniversary on the Western Front will be the Kaiserschlacht, the Kaiser's Battle, and we've got a tour going out for March 2018, looking at the fighting on the 21st of March and the British retreat and the German offensive. The following month we'll be focusing very much on Villers-Bretonneux and the Anzacs, and we're attending the dawn service at Villers-Bretonneux and the opening of the new Monash Museum there. And we've also, next August is the centenary of the breakout battles, and we've got a Somme Advance to Victory centenary tour, attending the official ceremony that will take place somewhere in the Amiens area, and then looking at some of those last battles, including locations, iconic locations like the Ricqueval Bridge and also the Sombray Canal. Another one we're continuing with for next year is the War Undergrounds, where we go underneath the Western Fronts. We go down the tunnels at Bouzaincourt. Beer and Battlefields is an interesting take, looking at the war from the point of view of breweries in Flanders, how they were affected by it, and obviously the role of beer for troops behind the lines, as you can see with this fine collection of Germans lined up here, toasting the Kaiser before they're about to go up the line. We continue with our tour at Verdun, one of the most iconic and important battlefields further down the Western Front. Crimson Coast is a very popular tour looking at life behind the lines, the role of women in the First World War, foreign labour such as the Chinese Labour Corps, the Indian Labour Corps, Egyptian Labour Corps, British West Indies Regiment and so on. And we also focus quite a lot on that tour on John McCrae, the Canadian poet, seeing not only where he was in 1915, where he wrote in Flanders Fields, his famous poem, but also going to visit his grave at Wimmera. Our walking tours are now in their 18th year, and we've got Walking the Ypres Salient, where we look at some of the key sites around Ypres, and also go up to the Belgian coast around Newport. But we've got a new version of Walking the Somme for next year, which will look at some of the very popular 1916 locations on the Somme, at Thiepval, the Nab and Mash Valley, Mametz Wood and Pozières, but we're also going to look at a couple of 1918 locations by walking the ground between Villas Guislain and Pigeon Ravine on the Hindenburg line, where there was fighting in that area both in March and then September of 1918. In 2014 we ran a tour, and we're the only ones that have ever done this, looking at the whole Western Front in one tour, the Western Front end to end, and we've brought that back for 2018, and it literally starts on the beach at Newport where the Western Front began and takes you down to the border of Switzerland where the Western Front came to an end. Obviously you can't do that in 5 minutes, so it's a 9-day tour, and it covers a lot of different battlefields, and it sees, for example, the trenches you can see here, the fantastic trenches at the Manda Massige in the Champagne, and many other trenches beside around Hartman's Villacop in the Vosges and in the Argonne battlefields. We continue to do Gallipoli, and this is a very popular tour, flying out to Turkey and visiting the battlefields of 1915, both the British ones at Cape Helles, Anzac and also Suvla Bay. We have a tour that covers both World Wars, World War I and World War II, and a bit of Waterloo, Battlefield Belgium. And that gives you a bit of an insight. A lot of people don't quite know what tour to come on, and that's not a bad one for that. And that one also takes you up to, as you can see from the picture of the Sherman there, the Walcheren Island, to look at the operations there in 1944. But moving on to our World War II tours, next year, aside from being an important World War I year, is also the 70th anniversary of the Dam Busters raid. And we're going out for the anniversary of that, starting in the UK at Sheffield, going to Derwent Dam, going down to Hendon to see the RAF Museum, Reculver, where some of the testing took place, and then going out to Holland and Germany to look at the graves of dam buster crews, and then visit the site at the exact moment, 75 years on from when the operation took place. Our other popular D-Day and Normandy tours continue, both with our coach-based tour and also with our walking tour. We've got a 7-day in-depth Normandy tour as well that looks at a lot of locations that we don't normally go to in Normandy, including the excellent Dead Man's Corner Museum, for example. Panzers in Normandy looks at the Armoured War in Normandy. Race to Remagen. These are all good follow-on tours, having done a D-Day and Normandy tour. That looks at the battle in the Rhineland and Aachen, and then the race to the Rhine at Remagen Bridge. Operation Market Garden looks at the events that took place 73 years ago today, when troops dropped into Arnhem, and then ground forces of 30 Corps moved up the route in from Belgium into Holland to link up with the airborne forces. And we see, for example, the not just the battlefields at Arnhem, but also the ground en route, including the superb Overloon War Museum on that one. We have a slightly more in-depth Arnhem tour that also looks at the conclusion to Arnhem, which is the 1945 battles in the Rhineland. And we also, going back to the success of the Dunkirk film this year, we've got Dunkirk and Fortress Europe that looks at the operations of 1940. They've completely revamped the Dunkirk Museum, which we include on this tour, and then we look at the follow-on from 1940, the occupation of France and the building of the Atlantic Wall and the eventual liberation of that area by British and Canadian troops in 1944. The Battle of the Bulge, we look at the fighting in the Ardennes. But we've got a follow-on to that this year. Another new Second World War tour is following General Patton, Battlefield Luxembourg, where we go into Luxembourg and see some of the key sites connected with the fighting there in 1944 and 45. But we also have a look at the West Wall, section of the German West Wall, which is just down the road, as well as, importantly, follow the story of General Patton himself, seeing his grave and looking at the incident which resulted in his death just after the war, and going to the Patton Museum. The Maginot Line, a static system of defences, is a very popular tour where we go and look at a whole series of different bunker systems, looking at the examples that were built in Belgium, including Fort Epernay, and then going down to France to look at the main Maginot Line itself, at places like Villy-le-Fert and Fermont. We have a 7-day tour looking at commando operations from Saint-Nazaire right through to Normandy. France under the jackboot looks at the occupation of France in the Second World War, seeing places, as you can see from the photograph there, such as Oradour-sur-Glande. We've got another new tour which we started this year, which continues into next, looking at Peenemünde, the development of the V rockets. And our very popular Air War Europe tour looks at the story of the Dam Busters and also Colditz and the Great Escape. But we've got a couple of new air tours this year, where we fly out for a 5-day period. One at Berlin, looking at the downfall in Berlin, the end of the Second World War in 1945, and not just doing the site of Hitler's bunker, but doing the Seelau Heights and the final battles in Berlin itself. We've got a longer version that tells the whole story of the rise and fall of the Third Reich. But another one of our fly ones is the Rise of Evil, going to Munich, Nuremberg and the Eagle's Nest, where we fly in, staying in central Munich, and then look at some of these key locations connecting with the history of the Third Reich, and putting into perspective the Nazi regime, and also looking at the crimes of the Nazi regime, for example, by going out to Dachau on that tour. We have a number of Holocaust tours that look at the important story of the Holocaust that should never be forgotten. A longer one that goes right across parts of Europe, looking at sites like Auschwitz and Krakow and Sachsenhausen and Theresienstadt. But again, we've got a shorter version where we fly into Krakow, stay in central Krakow and visit Auschwitz, the Schindler factory, Krakow ghetto, and look at some of the Second World War sites there. The Italian campaign's a popular one, where we go to Monte Cassino and Anzio, and also on the Adriatic coast. But again, for 2018, we've got a fly version where you can fly out for 5 days and look at Anzio, Monte Cassino and the Liri Valley, and also San Pietro, where the Americans were fighting in 1943. We go to Jersey to look at the story of the Channel Islands, and again, something different for 2018. We're looking at the Cold War, behind the Iron Curtain, looking at spies and espionage. There's a brand new spy museum in Berlin, for example, and we're going to go to what you can see on the picture here is the old internal German border that's been preserved at Hohensleben. We go to that. A good in-depth tour of Berlin, looking at the Stasi sites and the Bridge of Spies that inspired that film. And then we go across to Leipzig, to the Stasi bunker there, Cold War Museum. And unusually we go to a battlefield then that never was, which is the Fulda Gap, where World War III would have broken out with the Russians coming through the American positions when NATO occupied most of West Germany during that Cold War period. So something a little bit different. Going back much further into history, Waterloo, with the Walking the Waterloo battlefields, the Waterloo reenactment weekend gives you good insight into those campaigns. David Warren, one of our Waterloo and Napoleonic War specialists, also does a war with Wellington in the Peninsular War. And we have a few tours where we look at some sites in the UK, the Edinburgh Military Tattoo, Richard III and Bosworth. But Scott Brand, one of our Australian guys who served in the Australian military himself, has drawn up this fantastic Vietnam War tour for us for 2019, so not for next year, the year after, where we go on an incredible 16-day journey looking at the war in Vietnam from Dien Bien Phu in the 50s right through to the American involvement in the 1960s and 70s. We do the Zulu Wars, go to South Africa, to America, to the American Civil War battlefields. So as you can see, 2018 is a packed year with a lot to potentially visit. And if you'd like to receive one of our brochures, you can go onto the website ledgerbattlefields.co.uk, where all the tours are on there. You can order a brochure via that. There's a special page where you can click on, put your details, and they'll send a brochure to you. You can give Ledger a call. or you can ping them an email and they'll send you a brochure. So I hope you found that of interest. Thanks for your comments, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.